Today is the 4-year anniversary that Prince passed away. And as time goes by, I get more and more connected. I'm just getting older, I guess, but more and more connected to names that pass. And Prince was a big name for me growing up, just musically. And you guys know me well enough that music is very much a part of my day. And so that one hit me kind of hard. And so I still have my drives around Eagle and Gypsum where I just do a Prince playlist and drive around town and listen to some good old 80s. So that one's for Prince. Let's do this next, guys. Let's look at our announcements and agenda. Here we go. So today, this lecture is going to be me going over phylogeny and chapter 26, which is really an incredible transition from the evolution work that we've been doing and connecting that into how we classify all the diversity of life that we see on this planet, from single cell bacteria and archaea all the way up to the vastness of the large multicellular organisms such as ourselves. So I'm going to go over that today and connect to that in classification of life. But as my announcements will tell you, we're going to take a slight departure from the syllabus. I would be not doing my job properly if we didn't spend a little bit of time researching viruses and gaining a little bit more of an introductory level of knowledge and understanding beyond what we're reading in the news, but actual educated biologists learning about viruses. And so you're going to have an assignment for a shorter reading guide to complete for Friday night, the 24th, on viruses in chapter 19. And so that's my main announcement to make for you guys here. I will probably have one more virus assignment for us on Friday to do for next week on COVID. Your joke of the day: what happened when the trees fell in love? I'm going to let you think that one over. And then let me hop in here to the reading guide, and let's go through the reading guide fairly quickly. We make pretty quick work of chapter 26. I don't spend a long time on this, but it's great to see the content of this along with the game that you guys played over the weekend that was due this past Monday evening in regards to how we construct phylogenetic relationships in our understanding of looking at structures and functions of organisms and looking at the genetics and all those different pieces that we've learned about in terms of evidences of evolution. Now it's a matter of using those evidences of evolution to derive how different organisms, different species are related, whether they're closely related with a very recent common ancestor or having to rewind way back in time to actually find that common ancestor. So let's hop in here. As we take a look, I'm going to zoom this just a little bit for y'all. Let's get my face as far out of the way as possible. Ooh, I can make it smaller. Nice. All right, there we go. So phylogeny is the evolutionary history of a species or a group of species. So when we see those things like that, a family tree or an organismal tree, that phylogenetic tree that we did even the game with most recently, we're studying phylogeny. Systematics is a discipline focused on how we classify those organisms and determine evolutionary relationships. And from the crash course video with Hank Green, you noticed his excitement in talking about classifying and filing organisms and how not super duper exciting the topic may seem, but in terms of understanding how we're all connected based on the information that we have currently, which is loads and loads of information, it's actually pretty amazing to know that we're able to determine with a pretty strong sense of confidence the level of relationships that different species, may have. Organisms share many characteristics. Organisms of different species share many characteristics really because of that common ancestry, that thread of going back in time to a common ancestor of those maybe potentially different species. Taxonomy is that study of how organisms are named and classified. Number 5 connects again back to that crash course video that we watched last week, but Carl Linnaeus, back in the 1700s, instituted an introductory system of naming organisms, a common language, so that scientists, researchers, the common layperson can speak in common language. And the base language for that system is Latin. When we talk about the binomial name of a species, we're really speaking of the genus that they belong to, and then their species. So that's the two names that we'll see. The first letter of the first name is always capitalized, and if it's typed, those words, the genus and the species, are always typed in italics. So if I were to hop in right here and say, all right, it's actually right here in number 7. The binomial name for Homo sapiens is, which I did it incorrectly because I did not italicize it. So that's what we would do. When you see that italics with a capital first word, lowercase second word, that should be our indicator or our quick clue that, oh, okay, we're talking about a species of something. In the case of Homo sapiens, this is for humans, which means wise man, which, I'm a cynic from time to time, so that may cause me to smirk, especially because that name's been around for a few hundred years. So it is what's stuck with us, and so we are the wise man of planet Earth. I'd like to know what future species of humans will be called. Maybe some of you guys will be around for that. Anyways, moving on to number 8. You guys are going to want to know this order from the most broad classification all the way down to the most specific. As we look at this list from top to bottom, that's exactly what it's showing us. The broadest classification is the domain. And if you'll remember, that's our 3 domains. All of the eukaryotes found on planet Earth, animals, plants, fungi, protists, all belong to eukarya. Every single one of them, whether it's a single-celled little euglena protist or an elephant or a whale or you, we are all part of the domain eukarya. And then our other 2, those are both prokaryotic species that are single-celled organisms, the bacteria and the archaea. So they, once upon a time, were all part of their own classification as one kingdom known as Monera. And that was back in my day, back in the 20th century, way back in the 1900s. We were taught just Kingdom Monera. We were not taught domains until more research was done and more understanding was come down to the fact that there are 2 very different single-celled organisms that are prokaryotic. And they deserve their own distinction, and that distinction led to this 3-domain classification system. So the archaea, although they're single-celled prokaryotes, and the bacteria are also single-celled prokaryotes, they belong to very different domains because of those structural differences. As we work our way down, we're just getting more and more and more specific. So when we go to the next line, the kingdom, that's when we talk about specific kingdoms within a domain. So within the eukaryotic domain or eukarya, we have the kingdoms plant, animal, fungi, and protista or protists. So there's those 4 kingdoms that belong to domain eukarya. And we get more specific to phylum, then more specific to class, then order, family, genus, species. You guys are going to know this order from most general, the domain, down to most specific, the species. Let's see. I think my quick mnemonic device to help us remember this, if you guys have your own, I always encourage you to use your own because it helps you to remember better than one somebody else made up. But that being said, the one that I created, I think just kind of off the cuff one day in class was Dr. King Philip cuts open frogs, green stuff. Dr. King Philip cuts open frogs, green stuff. And that stands for domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So that way we should be able to kind of pick apart if we're given questions in terms of understanding which is more specific than another. So if something belongs, 2 different species belong to the same family, and we're comparing them to another species that doesn't belong to that family, that's a quick separator from the first 2 species to that third one. As we go down to some more terminology, what is a taxon? A named unit at any level of the hierarchy. So a question could be asked, for example, what is the taxon for human? What is the taxon for humans at the family level? That question alone is asking for what's the specific name for the family that humans belong to. As we get on to number 10, what is a phylogenetic tree? Which again, that's what you guys worked on for that activity/game for the other night. And what are some problems that scientists have encountered in classifying organisms? This is a branching tree to show the evolutionary history of a group of organisms. And one thing that I could say right now is missing or incomplete information. When we have missing information, it's tough to draw definitive conclusions about relationships among organisms. But that being said, as DNA research has improved and is readily available at our fingertips to quickly sequence the genome of an entire organism, which again, take back to when I was your age, they were just starting to sequence the genome of a human, and that took them a solid 10 years to do that for one human. Now, they can grab, if they get the DNA for any given organism on this planet, they can sequence that genome in a matter of a day. And so that's an incredible advancement that's been made. Number 11, you would never need to know this. It was just a matter of me showing for you, as you kind of copied this from your book, the classification for a panther. Again, going from the most general, panthers belong to the domain Eukarya. And so these three little bowls at the bottom are showing the three domains. And then plunked into domain Eukarya is kingdom Animalia, which is what a panther belongs to. And then it belongs to the phylum Chordata. It is a mammal, so it belongs to class Mammalia. The order it belongs to, as we get more and more and more and more specific, the order it belongs to is Carnivora. The family is Phylogeny, genus Panthera. And so if we were to say its actual specific species, again, we would say the genus Panthera, and then the species it belongs to is Pardus. So Panthera pardus is how we would refer to a panther. As we go down, what does a branch point represent on a phylogenetic tree? Just like you worked on for the activity the other day, when we had that branch and it's one branch that's separated into two branches and maybe a species at the end of each of those branches, that branch point down at the bottom, that was a divergence of two evolutionary lineages from the common ancestor. Okay, so when we see two lines next to each other, it never specifies that one species came from the other. It's that they each came from, at that branch point, a common ancestor that resembles both of its future species. As we look down to actually, I just threw this in here as kind of a reference to us as we look at a phylogenetic tree. And we see here at the left, basically moving in time, in this case, from left to right on this tree, we see the ancestral lizard that is related to all of these geckos, snakes, iguanas, the monitor lizard, and the eastern glass lizard. They all have differing levels of relatedness to each other. And as we can see, the geckos kind of start things off here, and then there's a branching off or a breaking off as we go down. And I may refer back to this graphic. That's part of the reason I just put this in here. What are sister taxa? These are groups of organisms that share an immediate common ancestor. And they really are, when we look at our little goalposts here that are pointing sideways. When we look at this, the monitor lizard and the eastern glass lizard have a branch point very close to them. And so we could say that those two species are sister taxa. I wouldn't really say monitor lizard is a sister taxa to the snakes. That's a ways further away, where they don't have an immediate common ancestor. That was a little further back into the past. A basal taxon, number 14, is a lineage that diverges early in the history of a group and lies on a branch that originates near the common ancestor of the group. A lineage that diverges early in the history of the group, and it lies on a branch that originates near the common ancestor. So if we looked at this, the basal taxon that's probably the least related to the rest would probably be the geckos. Number 15, phylogenetic trees are intended to show patterns of descent, not phenotypic similarity. So again, you're not always going to see structurally the exact same or super duper close being, in this case, sister taxa. If we look here, monitor lizard and eastern glass lizard, actually, one of them doesn't even have limbs, yet they belong next to each other. So that's through a lot of genetic research and sequencing genomes to determine similarity and differences based on sequences of, again, going back to things that we looked at earlier on in the evolution unit, certain proteins and DNA sequences. Number 16, a phylogenetic tree does not show the absolute age of the species shown. It's just showing some relative connections to other species. It is not giving us anything in terms of how long that species has been around or was around in the past. we would need more information for sure than what we're given here to determine how old a species is or how long it's been on planet Earth. Number 17, should we assume that a taxon on a phylogenetic tree evolved from the taxon next to it? And that goes back to what I mentioned earlier. No, we can only infer that the lineage leading to an organism and the lineage leading to a closely related organism both evolved from a common ancestor. So go back up here to our monitor lizard and our eastern glass lizard. There's no statement being made in this graphic here that one evolved from the other. If we follow our goalposts backwards here to this branch point here, that's where that common ancestor is. Now, we don't have a picture of it here. We don't have information for it here, but we just know that there was a common ancestor based on the information that we have currently at this point that led to the evolution of the monitor lizard and the evolution of the eastern glass lizard through some events of speciation, thinking back to chapter 24. 18, systematists must focus on homologies. So those are terms that came up. Homology and analogy came up in chapter 22. So way back at the beginning of our evolution unit, homologous structures and analogous structures. The ones that are most important for determining these relationships are those homologies or homologous structures, because those are due to, if you'll remember, those are due to those recent common ancestors. And so that's where takes us down to analogies in number 19, when the question asks about an Australian mole, the marsupial mole, and the North American Eutherian mole. Even though they're both kind of just called moles, they're actually not really that closely related, even though they have a lot of structural or morphological similarities. That's where we don't want to get taken down that wrong path of looking at an analogous structure and determining that that means those two species are closely related. It actually tells us the opposite. It means, actually, they're not closely related at all. They're analogies that came about just due to similar environmental pressures on completely different parts of the planet in this case. Australia, very different part of the planet, an island unto its own that's not connected to North America. And again, if we do genetic studies, we don't see a lot of closely relatedness between those two different species of mole. So those are due to analogies. Their internal anatomies are very different. Their common ancestor was 140 million years ago, and it wasn't even really mole-like at all. Another term that you will see for analogous structures when we're looking at phylogenetic trees, they won't really use the term analogous structures. So fun for you guys, another term is homoplasy. A homoplasy is an analogous structure. So that means not closely related. And again, that's what I'm like, guys, when you guys listen to this lecture, have an extra sheet of paper next to you, maybe just to hand write some things. Or if you're more in the typing mode, have part of your screen set up so you can type in, oh yeah, another term for analogous structures, or what that means is not closely related. If that's not battered into your brain just yet, keep working on it. Number 21, how do researchers use DNA molecules in determining evolutionary relationships? We've been there. We've seen this. You know this. We compare base sequences. The more closely related two species are, the less differences there are in their DNA. The less related the species are, the more differences we'll find. Number 22 asked you to do a concept check question, and then I didn't put the question in there. So if you had a different version of the text, it's possible you did a different question. So I've actually added in the question now, so I know we're at least all talking about the same thing for this question. It says, suppose that two species, A and B, have similar appearances but very divergent gene sequences. So they look alike, but their genes are very different. While species B and C have very different appearances but similar gene sequences. Which pair of species is more likely to be closely related? That takes us right back up to number 21. The more similarities in DNA, the more closely related those species are. We cannot be fooled by just having morphological or structural similarities. So B and C would be the more closely related species in this example. Those similar gene sequences indicate a more recent common ancestor. For our last two quick, couple other key concepts that I wanted us to understand before we leave this quick look at chapter 26. Humans and chimpanzees are sister species. Explain what that means. That just means we share a recent common ancestor. Just like going back up to our graphic and seeing the sister species monitor lizard and eastern glass lizard, or the sister species, the iguanas to these guys here, that quick look right there. All that means is they have a recent common ancestor. That's it. One didn't evolve from the other, or vice versa. And number 24, this is another, again, a term that we've covered, and we're going to wrap up with chapter 26. It is necessary to distinguish homology from analogy to infer phylogeny, or those relationships. Homologous means there's a common recent shared ancestry. The more recently the two species diverged from each other, the less different the homologies will be. The longer ago they diverged, the more different the homologies will be. Analogous, that's just due to not even really being related closely at all, way, way, way in the past, not recent common ancestor, but just similar environmental pressures led to similar traits coming out of totally potentially different species. We don't want to be misled in determining evolutionary relationships because of analogous structures. Whew. I think that's everything, guys. Again, your assignment that you'll see after watching this lecture will be to work on questions 1 through 20 of the chapter 19 reading guide on viruses, so we can understand a little bit more, at least on an introductory biological level, of what we're dealing here with COVID. Hopefully some of it maybe you already know that you've just learned in these last 5-ish weeks that we've been off. By the way, guys, here you are in week 6. We're cruising through it. You're doing awesome. I'm proud of you guys. Thank you for sticking with it and sticking with me. We're doing the best to make it work and have some fun with this as we go. Let's finish with this. If my internet decides to slowly figure things out, it's not going to. We're going to move on, guys. Listen to some Prince. Actually, the day he passed was April 21st, which is Tuesday of this week. Have a great rest of your week, everybody, and I will talk to you hopefully sooner rather than later. Give me a shout if you need anything.